Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game that had an uphill battle. It was the second game released in a series that already had a presence in that generation's hardware. It had to stand out, not just on the merits of technology, but on innovation, unique ideas, and a new way of looking at stealth. And it completed this task with ultimate proficiency. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game that stands the test of time. It's one of those projects that doesn't feel like it aged a day since its release. It plays smooth, it's fun, packed with action and stealth alike. It's a masterclass in game design. Its story has some of the hardest hitting moments in the entire series. It manages to change the viewer's perspective on everything we've seen thus far. It manipulates its audience with ease, crafting a tale that both enthralls and surprises. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a legendary game, and probably the most notable entry in the entire series. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'll be taking a look at Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. We'll be talking about story, gameplay, mechanics, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos in this series on Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2, I would highly recommend watching those videos now. Each of the videos in this series is meant to represent a distinct era in the history of Metal Gear Solid, where the series was at during that time and where it progressed to. Understanding where the series has come from will provide a lot of context for this video. As a general rule of thumb, if I start talking about something, assume that I'm going to spoil it. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. After the release of Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima had originally planned to leave the series. This will become quite common across the release of almost every game in the series, Kojima stating publicly that it may be his last Metal Gear game. Development on MGS3 did actually begin without him, but when the team was left without their director, they found it hard to replicate the ideas that he had. Metal Gear Solid 2 was meant to be my last Metal Gear before I handed it off to the team, and the team did actually start working on Metal Gear Solid 3, but unfortunately, there were problems and it didn't go well, so I was forced to come back and work on it. In the time between Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3, Kojima had kept busy developing plenty of different titles, like his work as a producer on the Boktai series for the Game Boy Advance and Zone of the Enders. I decided not to include sections on these games in this video because Kojima didn't actually direct them, he was just a producer. But it is worth noting that Boktai was directed by Ikuya Nakamura, who had already worked on MGS 1 and 2. And Zone of the Enders was directed by Noriaki Okamura, who was heavily involved in Police Knots and would go on to work on Metal Gear Solid 5. Yoji Shinkawa also did artwork on Zone of the Enders, so both of these games were flowing with Metal Gear team members. Some of these new team members transferred over to Metal Gear Solid 3. For example, Shuyu Murata worked as a writer on Zone of the Enders and then moved over to MGS3 to help out with writing as well. Most of the standard members had returned though, Tomokazu Fukushima, Yoji Shinkawa, Motosada Mori, but this thing was only getting bigger. The original plan was to release MGS3 for the PlayStation 3, following the template for the previous entries in the series, with each game jumping forward into the new generation of consoles. But the PlayStation 3 was a long ways away, so the team decided to create the game for the current PlayStation 2. Because the game was going to be on the same console as the previous entry, the team didn't have the advantage of new tech and advancements in graphics to make their game impressive. They had to advance the environments, gameplay, and mechanics to make the game even more impressive than Metal Gear Solid 2, without relying on graphics. Kojima's solution to this was to drastically change the setting of the game. Instead of placing Snake in the small hallways and rooms of labs, and secret facilities, Snake would be thrown into the jungle. The goal was to make a convincing jungle, though. The setting had to be realistic and interactive, with plenty of things that the player could do, like climb trees, hide in the brush, and hunt animals. And Kojima was ready to make it pretty clear this time around that the protagonist would not be changing, and that it would be Snake. But the thing is, the main character in the game is you. Giving too much importance to the character could result in the gamer being alienated from the game. To this end, Kojima felt like people enjoyed Snake because it was easy for them to replace him with themselves, rather than them being enamored with his actual personality. The boss designs this time around were based on single-word emotions like fear or pain. Kojima's original idea and direction to Shinkawa was to have them look like monsters, but Shinkawa went a bit too far with it and had to dial it back. But at the end of the day, Kojima's goals had stayed mostly the same. He wanted his games to have a positive effect on people's lives. Metal Gear Solid was eventually released on PlayStation 2 on November 17, 2004 in North America, December 16, 2004 in Japan, March 4, 2005 in Europe, and March 17, 2005 in Australia. As with previous games in the series, there was a second release of the game called Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. This included the MSX versions of the first two Metal Gear games, a multiplayer mode called Metal Gear Online, and a changed camera for the main game. This version of the game was eventually remastered in the HD and Legacy editions of the game, and was then re-released in the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. As much crap as I've talked about the Master Collection in previous videos, I actually did end up getting footage for MGS3 from that version of the game for this video. This was because the Legacy Collection, while it does play fine, for some reason does not agree with my setup, and I had many issues trying to get footage of MGS2 with it. The Master Collection was a bit more reliable when getting footage for the game. Metal Gear Solid 3 begins as a plane is flying over Pakistan. They are approaching Soviet airspace as a mysterious figure is smoking a cigar on the plane. His comms team tells him to get ready to participate in the world's first Halo jump. We're quickly treated to a flashback when Jack, our main character, was debriefed on the mission. Zero, the main point of contact for the mission, tells him that the CIA has given them the green light for this operation. It's called the Virtuous Mission, and since the game is actually a prequel set far before MGS1 and even Metal Gear, it's the Fox unit's first chance at becoming recognized. The goal is to find Nikolai Stepanovich Sokolov. He is a famed rocket scientist, the head of a Soviet top-secret weapons research facility. He was originally responsible for the engine in the rocket that carried the Soviets' first manned space flight into the sky. He wanted asylum in the West, and his family was successfully retrieved. Zero managed to get him to the other side of the Berlin Wall, but he became quickly exhausted from the multiple-day journey, and he was checked into a hospital. In some really unfortunate timing, the Cuban Missile Crisis then began. I should probably just assume that everyone knows this, but this was a real event that happened in October of 1962. It was the moment that the Cold War came to a head, and the closest that the Soviets and the US got to entering a full-out nuclear war. The basics are that the US moved nukes into Turkey and Italy, and the Soviets responded by moving nukes into Cuba. The two countries ended up making a deal, and in the real world, the US had to move their missiles out of Turkey. But in MGS3, this was just a cover story, because the real trade was for Sokolov. Zero then had to hand the scientist off to the Soviets, even though he begged to be saved. Supposedly, Sokolov is now being forced to continue developing weapons in secret for the Soviets, and the project they have him working on is almost finished. Sokolov has recently been moved to Selinoyarsk, a place located in the Virgin Cliffs. This is their last chance to retrieve Sokolov during the field test of the new weapon that he's been working on. We then jump back to the present as Jack is about to begin his jump. Our mission is to infiltrate Selinoyarsk and get Sokolov, extracting him to the west. Snake falls into the forest here and takes off his mask, but this sequence will actually be slightly different based on the selection that we made in the beginning of the game. Once we start a new game, we are asked to make a choice based on which game we like in the series. If we select I liked MGS2, then we'll actually see Raiden's face here, but it turns out that this is a mask that Snake was wearing to fool the crew of the plane. This whole sequence really just screams Kojima trolling to me. Snake even wears the same mask that Raiden wore during his infiltration of the big shell here, trying to convince players just for a moment that they'd be playing Raiden again, only to be faking them out is pretty funny to me. But obviously, if you didn't like MGS2, you wouldn't select that option and you'd just see Snake's face when he takes off the mask. Snake even responds quite like Raiden when talking to Zero in the beginning.
Your codename for this mission will be Naked Snake. I'll be referring to you as Snake from now on. You're not to mention your real name.
Snake?
What, you don't like snakes?
What do you mean?
But regardless, this is Snake, and he's been given a new code name for this mission, Naked Snake. This isn't the same Solid Snake that we know and love. This is before Shadow Moses, before everything that we've gone through, back to the very beginning. And to be honest, I'll just spoil the big twist now because I think this analysis will work a lot better if we know this up front. But this is not Solid Snake. This is Big Boss. This is not the origin of Solid Snake, but his genetic father, the one that provided the DNA to create him. We're going to see how the villain was made. But since we're on the topic of Raiden, why wasn't this character change up as controversial as the one in MGS2? Why weren't fans upset they were playing Big Boss instead of Solid Snake? Well, this is mainly because there wasn't a bait and switch reveal. People didn't think that they'd be playing one character and then switched to a different one. Also because Big Boss basically is Solid Snake. Snake is a genetic clone of Big Boss. They look identical and basically act mostly the same up to a certain point, so it doesn't really matter when it's viewed on a surface level. Technically, we aren't playing Solid Snake, but effectively we are. Also, Big Boss isn't Big Boss yet, he's just Naked Snake. Snake, of course, says his signature line at this point.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Zero decides to go by a code name for now, Major Tom. He then tells Snake how important it is for him to maintain stealth in this mission. Since the US doesn't officially recognize this mission and cannot take credit for it, no one can know that they were here. All equipment must be procured on site for this very reason. We then move forward and Snake gets his backpack from a tree. Luckily, we are armed with camouflage to keep us from being seen in the jungle. A lot of things have changed this time around in MGS3. While MGS2 was very similar to Metal Gear Solid 1 in its gameplay, adding a few upgrades here and there, focusing more on structural improvements rather than new mechanics or systems, Metal Gear Solid 3 adds a lot of new features that drastically change how we play the game. Because of the change in setting, there are a lot of new things to consider this time around. One of the biggest systems that we'll have to interact with is stamina and eating. While traversing the jungles, Snake's stamina will decrease, mainly while journeying and completing activities. Lowered stamina will affect us in many different ways. High stamina will heal our health faster. Low stamina will affect our aiming, our grip, and oxygen meters when hanging or swimming, and our stomach will even gurgle, which will give away our position to the enemies. The only way to increase stamina, which we will have to do regularly, is to eat food. We can pick up rations around the various facilities in the jungle or on the ground. Eating these will no longer heal us directly, but just increase our stamina, and the health will regenerate along with it over time. But food doesn't just come in the form of rations and pre-packaged food. These are actually quite rare. The more common form of food that we'll encounter is in the form of wildlife around the jungle. These can be snakes, alligators, frogs, anything living that we find in the forests. Each piece of food has different levels of stamina recovery, and Snake will comment on their tastiness each time he eats something.
Not too bad.
Some food is utterly disgusting to him and will recover no stamina, while others are very scrumptious and will be rejuvenating to Snake. This creates a level of interactivity with the environment that we haven't really had until now. The jungle itself becomes a living, breathing thing rather than just a set piece. It's another level of realism that's introduced, furthering the stealth simulator that has taken form here. And in this way, Snake becomes one with the jungle, taking from it just as much as it takes from him. But it also introduces another level of challenge to the game. Because we normally can't just heal ourselves, we have to rely on stamina regenerating our health. This makes combat a lot more punishing and encourages approaching situations with stealth overall. This will avoid us having to deal with as much health regeneration in the long run. In Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, we could just regain health directly with the use of rations, but it isn't that simple anymore. The other large thing that we'll have to pay attention to regarding health is curing. Now, if we get shot enough or damaged enough, we'll gain wounds rather than just losing some health. The wounds will prevent us from fully recovering our health. With our health permanently damaged, we'll have to treat these wounds in the fields of battle. Gunshots will require using a knife to remove the bullet, disinfectant to clean the wound, Stypic to stop the bleeding, and a bandage to wrap the cut. Each injury requires a different set of fixes. Arrow wounds, broken bones, burns, all require specific treatments to cure. We can even get food poisoning by eating the wrong thing, or venom poisoning by getting bit by a snake, and these will require antidotes to stop health loss. This, once again, adds another level of challenge. Having a finite supply of bandages or disinfectants makes us more prone to approaching situations with stealth rather than running through. We'll deal with less injuries this way, and it will cause less issues in the long run, but adding another system to treat ourselves in the jungle once again increases the immersion. Snake is alone out here, and getting shot isn't as simple as just eating some food. We need to remove the bullet. We need to prevent infection. These things make us feel closer to the character, as if the character's actually just us. And the third largest change to gameplay that Metal Gear Solid 3 made was camouflage. We now have the ability to equip different camos and face paints. Each face paint and camouflage will change a percentage meter that is at the top right corner of our screen. This tells us how much we've been blending in with the environment. We will blend in more if we're crouched or crawling on the ground, but it will also increase if our camo and face paint match our surroundings. Certain camos are better suited to the jungle or the rocky cliffs or the brick of dilapidated buildings. This hidden rating will determine how easy or hard it is for certain enemies to spot us when we're sneaking around, so ensuring that we have the best camo equipped for our environment is essential to stealth. All of these systems are incredibly important to Metal Gear Solid 3 as a whole. Like I said before, the team was really focused on creating an impressive show for their second game on the PlayStation 2. They couldn't rely on new technology. They had to present things like the camo system, food, and treating injuries. These mechanics make the entire thing a lot more realistic, which was what they were going for in the first place. The team actually had to create a new engine just to be able to render a realistic jungle that players could traverse. This was because of the uneven grounds of the forest, the climbable trees, etc. But all of this was in the pursuit of realism and the introduction of the environment as a character. The realism doesn't just factor in because it's true to life. Sure, treating wounds in battle would be something Snake has to do, but it also makes the mission more realistic. Naked Snake is not supported by the US government here. He has to survive on his own, and he's outside. There aren't exactly a ton of rations just sitting around. This mission takes time and energy. It doesn't just make the game more true to life, but more true to its own world. It feels as if the game has opened up and allowed us to explore its own world a bit more. As if these things were always there, but we just weren't able to experience them yet. The other large gameplay change we haven't talked about yet, which is a bit separate from the others, is the removal of the Soliton radar system. Kojima had felt that the game was starting to become just a radar game. People were staring at the radar rather than keeping an eye on their surroundings. Removing this is a big deal because Metal Gear had become synonymous with the radar at this point. but this was first justified in world, since this was a prequel. It therefore made sense that Snake would not have that functionality. The radar is still technically here, it's just massively downgraded. We have multiple pieces of equipment that we can equip in Metal Gear Solid 3. The mine detector, the motion detector, the AP sensor, the thermal goggles. These all require battery charge to be used. They have a little meter at the top of their equipment square, and this will slowly decrease as we use it. It will recharge when not in use, but if the meter is depleted, we have to let it recharge or refill it with a battery. The full Soliton radar from previous games has been split up into multiple devices. Its functionality has been spread across different pieces of equipment. We still get the same effects, but we no longer have this overpowered radar constantly sitting at the top of the screen. The AP sensor will beep when enemies are nearby, the motion detector will show us a very small version of a radar that only pings in the same area every few seconds. The mine detector is also battery powered now, so we no longer have the ability to use it without consuming charge. Again, a lot of these do add another level of immersion, but it's also just about Kojima's idea of making the gameplay more interesting. And it certainly does add some more challenge to MGS3. Kojima was sort of right when he said Metal Gear Solid games were becoming radar games. In Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, we are definitely looking at the radar more than we are the world. This means that the world is secondary to raw information. It's much easier to spot dots on a minimap than it is to spot enemies in the world, ones that may be behind cover or may be moving around. This itself works to break immersion in a way. But when the radar is removed, we rely on the motion detector and AP sensor far less. We have to locate enemies in the world rather than on the radar. That means our eyes, our attention, and our focus is on the world rather than on the raw information being given to us in the faux world. All of these things managed to really improve upon the previous formula that the games had set up. And at this point in the series, it honestly seemed kind of impossible to upgrade what Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 had already set up. But somehow adding the survival elements and mechanics that push realism, they managed. Outside of all of this, the game plays incredibly similar to Metal Gear Solid 2 when it comes to the basics, the core game. We sneak around areas trying to make it to our objective. If we get caught, we are sent into an alert phase and are forced to evade enemies until those phases go away. After Snake retrieves his equipment and is told of the importance of his mission, he is introduced to his new support team. Paramedic is the first new member, who will be supporting Snake through survival advice and saving. She's effectively the Mei Ling or Rose for this entry. The second member of our support team is the Boss. This is Snake's main mission advisor. She happens to be Snake's mentor and someone that he hasn't spoken to in years. Snake recalls the exact amount of time since they talked. Clearly, she means a lot to him.
It's been 5 years, 72 days, and 18 hours.
He's bitter that she left him so suddenly, but she had a secret mission that she needed to complete, and she taught Snake everything she could. The Boss then tells Snake that she can't teach him how to think like a soldier. She gives him the advice that he shouldn't feel anything for his comrades because politics dictates how people fight, and politics are a living thing. They change over time.
Listen to me, Jack. Just because soldiers are on the same side right now doesn't mean they always will be.
The Boss had this view on the world. She sees the world, nations, countries, and politics as ever-changing. With these things constantly shifting, the motivations of people that follow those nations and politics also change with the times. This is a large piece of Metal Gear Solid 3 and will be a through line across the entire game. Snake tries to say that he just follows whoever gives him the orders, the people at the top. But the Boss says that the people at the top change, and they don't dictate missions, but the times do.
In the end, you have to choose whether you're going to live as a soldier or just another man with a gun.
The Boss will be assisting Snake from a submarine in the Arctic. Sokolov is being held in a facility to the north, and our job is to get there. As Snake makes his way through the jungle, we cross paths with a few different groups of enemies, have to traverse the forest, and cross a suspended bridge. Eventually, we arrive at Rasvet, an abandoned factory that Sokolov is supposed to be located in. We find the man inside burning some papers in a fire. Zero has sent us here with a message. Sorry for being so late. Sokolov says that someone is after him, a man named Colonel Volgin of the GRU unit. In the West, he is known as Thunderbolt, but he has specific plans for Sokolov. He's trying to carry out a plan to overthrow the Soviet leader Khrushchev. Since Kennedy's assassination, the peace between the US and the Soviets have been dwindling. Volgin has formed an extremist faction to take back the motherland and destroy this peace with the United States. Volgin is trying to get Sokolov because he plans to use his weapons as leverage. The Soviet soldiers outside have been tasked with keeping Sokolov away from Volgin, even if it means killing him. Zero then calls Snake, telling him to get Sokolov to the recovery point, where a cutting-edge photon recovery device will extract him. Photon recovery devices will become incredibly important in a later entry. Snake actually has different responses here based on whether he was sighted on his way to the factory or not. Before we leave, Zero tells us that he unfortunately lost contact with the boss. Outside, we meet Ocelot, who doesn't quite yet have the name Revolver. He's the commander of the Ocelot unit of Spetsnaz.
And Ocelot never lets his prey escape. What?
He ends up shooting the Soviet soldiers to prove himself. He thinks that Snake is the boss, but when he realizes it isn't her, he calls in his Ocelot unit by making the craziest cat noise you've ever heard. Ocelot tries to shoot Snake, but his gun jams and Snake uses CQC, or close quarters combat, to take him down. He schools Ocelot on the gun that he's using. The way he was loading it was asking for a jam, and his technique that he uses to
Absorb the recoil. That's more of a revolver technique. But that was some fancy shooting. You're pretty good.
Ocelot then goes unconscious and Snake calls Zero. Ocelot seems to be working for Volgin, and the Major realizes that this whole situation is even messier than Cuba itself. Because it's such a high-stakes affair, we need to find Sokolov again, because he ran off when the fighting began. Snake finds him at the nearby suspended bridge. Snake is about to get him out of there when we hear a large shot being fired. A large tank appears, the Shagohod, a treading behemoth that's capable of launching nuclear IRBMs. Completing the second phase of this weapon will see its true form complete and begin a true world war. Sokolov was forced to build this and had no choice but to cooperate. The boss suddenly appears, carrying two large cases. She reveals that she's turned on the US, and she's taking Sokolov with her. She plans to work with Volgin and her own Cobra unit.
It's raining blood.
The boss has officially defected to the Soviet Union, and she isn't taking Snake with her.
Are we taking him with us?
No, this one is still just a child. Too pure for us Cobras. He has not yet found an emotion to carry into battle.
Snake hesitates when it comes time to shoot, and the boss dismantles his gun, breaks his arm, his ribs, and throws him into the ravine. Snake manages to grab her bandana before he falls.
The new blood has been rejected.
Are we done here?
Now, onto Sokolov's research facility.
Shagohod is ours.
Drift away. My place is with them now.
Snake ends up on the riverbank, and we get a call from our support team. Paramedic guides Snake in how to fix his various wounds. Snake then watches the Shagohod airlifted out and reaches his hand toward the boss. Volgin also has Sokolov's wife. Ocelot then uses one of the nukes in the cases that the boss brought him. Ocelot openly objects to what Sokolov is about to do, obliterate his own countrymen, but he does it anyways, and Snake watches as a recovery balloon falls. This is the end of the intro for Metal Gear Solid 3, the end of the virtuous mission. Shortly, a small amount of time will pass and we will re-enter the jungle with nearly the same mission as before, but with an entirely new scene that's been set for us. And this is the through line that I was talking about before. Effectively, the theme of Metal Gear Solid 3 is introduced very early, and it spends the rest of its runtime hammering that theme in. Where Metal Gear Solid 2's theme is more of one big strike right at the end, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a little bit more of a slow burn. Kojima has stated before one-word representations of the theme of each Metal Gear Solid game, with the first game being Gene, whether genes determine your destiny or not, the second game being meme, the things that we pass on to others, and the third game's theme Kojima defines as scene. Scene, in my opinion, really just means perspective, how things can change in someone's eyes based on the things around you or the scene that you're involved in. This is one of the first things that the boss talks to Snake about when we're introduced to her, and it's very important. The game will change our perceptions of characters. Even now, the boss was introduced to us as a mentor to Snake, someone that clearly has a much better handle on what it means to be a soldier, someone who knows what the true meaning of battle is, and someone who clearly has more experience than Snake. She is presented to us as a figure above Snake, someone that he genuinely cares about. So when she turns on him, defects from the US and joins the Soviet extremist group that Volgin has put together, this isn't just a friend turning against him, this is the ultimate betrayal. This is Snake losing his North Star, his compass, his guide, his icon that he has chosen to emulate. He was betrayed, but in a much more active way. He is now without. This is almost incomprehensible to Snake because his relationship with the boss is more than just a mentor, which is something a lot deeper that we'll get into later. After the intro sequence plays, one that I should note is interactive this time around, time has passed to 1 week later. Snake has been recovering in that time, and the team has been tasked with getting Sokolov out once again. Fox is taking some of the blame for the boss defecting, but this mission is a chance to clear their name. President Johnson and Khrushchev spoke about the nuke launch after it happened. The US is still claiming that they weren't involved, and Khrushchev is requiring them to prove it within 1 week. This involves getting Sokolov out, eliminating the boss, and taking out Volgin. If this doesn't happen, Khrushchev will be ousted and the US will be in much deeper nuclear threat. Luckily, the KGB has provided us 2 insiders, which isn't much, but it'll have to do. They are NSA code breakers that have defected. Their names are Adam and Eva. Snake once again parachutes into the forest, and we're tasked with rendezvousing with Adam. He is to be Snake's escape route during this mission. This mission is called Operation Snake Eater, and from the beginning, we're already at a different starting point. The goal is still the same, get Sokolov, but now we need to destroy the Shagohod, take out Volgin, and even eliminate the boss. This change of scene makes things look a whole lot different. One of our greatest allies has now turned into a mission objective. Before we head out on our mission, Zero decides to change his code name. Previously, he had the name Tom, which he got from the movie The Great Escape. I've talked about this movie before and how influential it was on Kojima when he made the original Metal Gear, so it only makes sense that he references it here. In that movie, the protagonists name their 3 escape routes Tom, Dick, and Harry. And he picked the name Tom because he thought it was the hole the group escaped from, but it wasn't. Zero associates this with their bad luck in the last mission and changes his name to Zero for good. This scene does a bit to humanize Zero in our eyes. This has to be viewed through the perspective of Metal Gear Solid 2 in the rearview mirror. In every Metal Gear Solid game, we have a point of contact, a guide over the codec that gives us our missions. We are a soldier no matter what. Someone needs to direct Snake, to tell him where to go, to keep him in line. But in Metal Gear Solid 1, this was Campbell. In Metal Gear Solid 2, it was Otacon in the tanker and Campbell once again in the plant. But obviously it wasn't really Campbell. It becomes important to convey to the player, at least subtly, that they can trust this advisor once again, that they aren't going to betray them, that they truly are a guiding figure to listen to. And I think the game does a lot to make us trust Zero in its first few sequences. This small, seemingly random scene with Zero talking about a movie makes us feel like he's a real person, rather than just a commanding member of the military. Even when he has Snake deliver a sympathetic message to Sokolov, this shows that he has empathy, he has feeling.
I have a message from him.
What is it?
He said to tell you sorry for being so late.
He remembers the mistakes he's made in the past, and this mission isn't just his job, it's about righting wrongs. Paramedic is once again on this mission with us, and we have to succeed or she will lose her medical license, already adding to the incredibly high stakes. We have an addition to our support team this time as well. His name is Sigint. He's an expert in weapons and equipment. Snake is now ready to head out and find Adam. We're told the question to ask him is, who are the Patriots? And the answer is Lali Lule Lo. Clearly the Patriots even have their hand in things, all the way back before Naked Snake was even Big Boss. Snake heads north only to find a white horse and the boss herself. She quickly disarms Snake again and tells him to leave, to get out of here. Clearly she doesn't want to kill Snake, or at least she has some reservations against it because she would have done it by now, but it doesn't change the fact that she defected. Snake tries to ask her why she did this, why she turned to the Soviets, but she only answers him with a question. Who is he loyal to? His country or the boss? His duty or his personal feelings? She tells him that he will have to choose soon, before getting on her horse and leaving. Before she does, she explodes Snake's drop pod, which will draw enemies to the area. He talks to Zero once the boss leaves and tells him that there must be a leak because the boss knew he was there. He also doesn't know if he'll be able to take the boss down and doesn't even really fully believe that she defected yet. We journey through the forests once again and find the abandoned factory ruins. A woman on a motorcycle arrives and tells Snake that she's the replacement for Adam, as he couldn't make it to the meeting. Snake asks her for the passcode, but she doesn't answer before soldiers arrive. She manages to kill all of them and explains herself. Volgan replaced Adam in the mission at the last second. He ended up sending Eva instead. Snake then shows off his weapons knowledge, noting that her weapon is Chinese-made, an imitation of a Russian model. She then gives Snake an American-made pistol, one that he's very impressed with, and a scientist's outfit to use as a disguise. We're supposed to use the outfit to get into the lab and get Sokolov out. Eva wants Snake to rest a bit before he heads out, and Paramedic echoes this sentiment. This serves as an introduction to the mechanic that causes us to regain stamina when we save. One thing that I will say about Metal Gear Solid 3 that it does really well is slowly introducing mechanics over the course of its first few hours. This was something that Kojima noted as an obstacle that the team had to tackle. Because there were so many new mechanics introduced and so much of a change in gameplay, they had to gradually welcome in new mechanics so that players wouldn't be confused upon starting the game. We're told about new features through the game as well, making things feel more in-world, as if our support team is telling us about survival tactics rather than mechanics in a video game. One by one, the idea of each mechanic is introduced. We're allowed to get comfortable with it, and then another idea is made plain. This prevents the player from getting overwhelmed by everything that the game has to offer, all of these changes. Snake ends up taking a rest, and Eva is seen using a radio while he sleeps. When he awakes, the two are surrounded outside. Eva decides to escape out the trap door, and we have to fend off the Ocelot unit by ourselves, only to find that Ocelot himself has already captured Eva. Ocelot is wearing the bullet that jammed his gun around his neck as he plans to use it on Snake. He's now using a revolver, taking the advice that Snake gave him before, but Snake points out something pretty important.
You call that an accident? Well, it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been showing off.
What did you say?
It's a nice gun, I'll give you that. But the engraving gives you no tactical advantage whatsoever. Unless you were planning to auction it off as a collector's item.
Ocelot isn't quite used to the reduced amount of shots in his new gun though, and miscounts the bullets that he has left. Eva ends up getting away and trying to shoot Ocelot, but Snake advises her to have mercy because he's just a kid. Snake moves on and gets a call from Eva, who tells him why she defected in the first place. She grew up in a small town, and when she went to work for the NSA, she ended up seeing the truth of the world. She saw the universe as the intelligence community saw it, from a distance.
People and countries are both changed by their environment and by the times.
This led her to the realization that the only difference between two sides was perspective.
Are you lying too?
Who knows? I've been trained to make even the most severe falsehood sound like the honest truth. Weren't you?
No. I believe because I have to, even if it is a lie.
This once again furthers the theme that we talked about before. Eva and the boss have both come to this same realization, that the world is really just a bunch of different sides that all have a slightly skewed perspective of whatever truth there is. Snake has yet to come to this realization. He still believes in things like truth and justice, that he is fighting for the right side. When Snake makes it out of the swamp and comes upon a small ravine, he is met with Ocelot once again. The man uses his signature cat call again to draw in his Ocelot unit. He's now equipped with 2 revolvers, so he has 12 shots instead of 6.
Shots.
This begins the first boss battle of the game against Ocelot. Enemies in MGS3 have both a health bar and a stamina bar, just like Snake. This was true of Metal Gear Solid 2 as well, but taking enemies' stamina all the way to 0 will win us the battle, but for doing this we'll also be rewarded with an extra camouflage. This is obviously just a little secret challenge for each boss and isn't mandatory, but taking out Ocelot is pretty simple overall. He runs between different spots on the other side of the canyon, and we have to take shots at him when he peeks out from cover. We can also optionally shoot at hornets' nests to get him out of cover, but his Ocelot soldiers don't like that we're fighting unfair, and will shoot at us for our dishonorable behavior. But this fight shares a lot of similarities to our first fight that we had with Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 1. We can see his shots left in his guns underneath his health. He has to stop to reload, which acts as an opening point for us, and he will ricochet shots at us behind cover. When Ocelot is defeated, a swarm of hornets come along and chase us away. Unfortunately, the two don't actually have a chance to finish their duel, and Ocelot twirls his guns in the air to take out the bugs like a badass. Ocelot even repeats a line from Metal Gear Solid 1.
You were lucky. We'll meet again.
You were lucky. We'll meet again!
Snake then jumps down into the ravine and finds himself in a cave system. We make our way through this cave system, only to be met with the first villain of the Cobra unit and our second boss fight, the Pain. As you can tell, all of the Cobra unit share similar names: the Pain, the Fear, the End, the Sorrow, the Fury, and the Boss. These are our cast of villains for this entry, outside of Volgin, of course, because he isn't truly a part of their unit. They share a lot of similarities in style to that of Foxhound or Dead Cell, a group of mercenaries or soldiers that are all a bit eccentric. And with MGS3, the focus on each of these characters is around a particular type of emotion. The Pain specifically has the ability to control insects. He can form them into balls or swarms that will attack us, and he clearly thrives off of feeling this emotion, pain. We have to damage the Pain from the outside of this small arena. He stands on a rock platform while we have to maneuver around the outside water using 2 small outcroppings of rocks to stand on. The Pain will throw grenades at us, sending them by way of insect swarm balls, and cover himself with insect armor. Getting through these defenses and attacks will see us defeating the man.
I've caught you at last. We are the sons of the boss. I am the Pain.
The The pain explodes when we kill him. It's clear these men in the boss's unit have a great loyalty to their leader, willing to die for her or their mission, we aren't sure, but Snake can at least relate to that type of feeling for his former mentor. We have to make our way through the surrounding areas, most of which consist of swamps and exterior areas of warehouses and buildings. When we arrive at a specific warehouse, Snake sees Sokolov being transported. Volgin gives Tatiana, Sokolov's wife, an electric shock. Volgin actually has the ability to control electricity, which is somehow one of the least crazy things that we've seen in the series so far. Ocelot shows up playing his own strange form of Russian roulette with Sokolov. He juggles the revolvers while firing through the chambers, but the boss arrives and stops him from actually shooting the man.
There's no such thing as luck on the battlefield.
She arrives with the news that the Pain has been killed by Snake, which greatly angers Volgin. He immediately thinks that Khrushchev must be behind this whole thing. The End and the Fear are here as well, two other members of the Cobra unit, and the boss believes that she sees the Sorrow somewhere as well. The group leaves, and it's worth noting that we can actually shoot the End here and kill him. This will avoid the later boss fight with him, but this is obviously a secret and not the intended way on dealing with him. Snake has to head deeper into the forest and eventually finds the lab that he needs to infiltrate. Here we have to use our scientist outfit to get into the facility. We can find chloroform or cigar spray that will take out enemies without conflict. Once we get through a few rooms in the facility, we happen upon a man named Alexander Leonidovich Granin. He's one of the best weapons scientists that the Soviet Union has at their disposal and the head of the Granin Design Bureau. He created a mobile ballistic system called SS-1C. His weapons were directly responsible for helping take down the Nazis. Despite all of this, he has been stripped of his authority, as Sokolov's designs have taken over his. He created a bipedal tank called Metal Gear that's set to be a revolutionary step forward for weapons.
Are you familiar with the theory of the missing link between apes and humans? Well, this technology will be the missing link between infantry and artillery. A kind of Metal Gear, if you will.
Granin thinks that his Metal Gear will dwarf Sokolov's Shagohod in the end. Since Volgin has cast him to the side, he plans to send the information to the US. He then gives us some very vital information, mostly because he's super drunk. He tells us about something called the Philosopher's Legacy. Volgin's father was connected to a group called the Philosophers. Their legacy was the large fortune that they had amassed. Volgin's father used the confusion of war to gain this fortune, and now Volgin has been using it to fund his extremist group and their weapons projects. Granin helps us even more by giving Snake a key card that he can use to get into the main base. He wants Sokolov out, and he wants the Shagohod destroyed. As we leave the base, we are ambushed by the Fear, the next member of the Cobra unit. He's a freaky, creepy, crawling beast that sticks to the trees. He shoots Snake with a poison dart, something that will ail us in this fight unless we use a serum to cure it. This fight is one of the easiest in the game. There are traps set up all around the forest, and we have to avoid them while getting shots off at the Fear while he flies around the trees. The thermal goggles assist us a lot here in seeing the traps laid out and keeping an eye on the Fear. We defeat the Fear and Snake makes contact with Eva. We need to get another key from her to get into the base. She plans to meet us on top of the nearby mountains, and unfortunately another boss is waiting for us just ahead. The End, the father of modern sniping.
Do you hear me, Snake? I am the End. I am here to send you to your ultimate fate. You'll make a fine quarry for my final hunt.
The boss fight with the End is probably one of the best in the entire series, mostly because the variety of ways in which we're allowed to approach it, the various ways that it can end or turn out. The battle actually takes place across multiple different areas. It's one large area that's connected through small canyons and tunnels, meaning that there will be short transition screens. It's a large place, and the End will always find a way to shoot at us from a distance. He's always waiting in the shadows, ready to take a shot. He will fire at us with his sniper, and his darts will slowly decrease our stamina. We have to make sure to remove these, otherwise Snake will be knocked out and will end up being taken prisoner. This makes things incredibly difficult because we have to trudge all the way back here to try again. This will also happen if we save the game and shut the console off for a few days. This is basically the end, taking Snake captive while he's resting. The most known way to solve this battle is to save the game and wait a week in real time, or just change the clock on your PlayStation. This would result in the end dying of old age before we could actually fight him. This is, of course, the most dishonorable way to win, as the end was spending the last of his few moments on this planet to battle Snake, someone that he considers a worthy foe. The direct way to deal with this battle is just to take out the end by shooting him enough to take down his health. This sounds a bit easier than it is though. If we do manage to find the end hiding out and get the drop on him, once we shoot him, he drops a flashbang and uses these few seconds to get away. The best way to deal with this that I've found is to turn away when he drops the flashbang so we aren't blind, and then we can chase him to his next hiding spot. We can follow him easier if we have the thermal goggles equipped because we can see his footprints in the mud. None of this is required. We can actually sneak around and not get shot by the end and get behind him before attacking. Most methods take quite a long time and the battle is drawn out a bit, and that's because it's supposed to be. This is supposed to be the battle of the end's life, the culmination of his expertise in sniping. If we take out the end in a true battle, then he tells us this much.
Spirits of the forest, I thank you. The boss would be proud of you. The time has come for a younger generation to rise. I've been wandering for more than a century, and now my journey comes to a close. What a splendid way to end it all.
After we move on from this battle, we're met with a massive ladder, an almost insurmountable task, a ladder that seemingly goes on forever, the ultimate challenge. In all seriousness, almost everyone knows about the Forever Ladder in Metal Gear Solid 3. It's actually 3 minutes long. We climb a ladder and hear the theme for the game. I know most everyone just treats this as a kind of goofy joke that the game has in store, but I always wondered what the real point behind this was. Obviously, there is a reason that it's here, so what is it? In my opinion, I think there are a few ways that we can view it. First, I think it's obviously a way to show off the theme song, but I also think it gives the player time to reflect on the game so far. The sequence is getting pretty close to about the halfway point of the game. It isn't the dead center point for sure, but a lot has happened so far. We're just starting to get to the head of this adventure, so it makes sense to give the player time to think about the things that have come to pass. Also, it could be metaphorical. It could be a representation of Big Boss's ascent to the famed soldier that he would become, climbing the ladder of prestige and expertise in battle. Or it could just be there because we're heading to the top of a high mountain and they wanted the game to be realistic. In other words, maybe the curtains are just blue. Once we get to the top, we have to weave through a ton of different mountain bases that are populated by a ton of soldiers, and even a large helicopter that will rain down fire on us if we get spotted. When we get to the top, Eva is already here. Snake notices her scars, but she won't tell him where she got them from. She says that the second phase of the Shagohod development is almost done. She gives Snake the key to get into Groznyj and also gives us a new technology that has been developed: instant noodles. Sokolov is located in the weapons lab of Groznyj, and we need Colonel class clearance to get in. This means we need to find a major who we can pose as. Eva then asks Snake about his relationship with the boss. He explains that she's sort of like a mother to him, but something even past this, something unexplainable.
For 10 years, we lived and died together. You couldn't possibly understand.
Eva then heads off, jumping a ramp with her bike. We can then see down into the outside of the base. Volgin is punching a barrel in a fit of rage. We find out that the body of Granin is inside. He had a transmitter in his shoe. He was working against them. Ocelot still speaks out against the way that Volgin is handling things, but Volgin doesn't really care. He thinks that there's a spy among their ranks, as some C3 explosives have recently gone missing. The boss reports about the deaths of the End and the Fear. She thinks that America is coming after them to try and steal the Philosopher's Legacy from Volgin. Volgin heads to get the nuke launcher, and Ocelot notes Tatiana's boots. When we head into the passageway that gets us into Groznygrad, we're quickly set upon by another boss battle. This is the Fury, who proclaims himself as an astronaut that has returned from space after seeing the world aflame. The Fury is a pretty simple boss fight if you come into it knowing what's going on. It always takes me a few tries upon revisiting this game because it can be a little tricky. The Fury will stalk this arena with multiple aisles. We can shoot him at the end of the aisle and he'll start flying around the arena, attacking us with his flamethrower. The flamethrower is the dangerous part of the fight because the fire persists after he shoots it. He'll end up covering the battlefield in flame and we'll have to seek cover in the shadows. It's tricky to get shots off on him while avoiding the fire, but obviously stealth is our friend. When we do take him out, he turns into a large flaming head and chases Snake out of the tunnel. We have to make our way into the base and take out a specific major called Rykov. We can steal his uniform and get access into the base. Rykov looks very similar to another character that we know, with a similar first 3 letters in his name. When we get inside, Sokolov is meeting with Tatiana, who is actually Eva in disguise. He is giving her files on the Shagohod. When we finally ask Sokolov, he doesn't know anything about the Philosopher's Legacy, but he does say that the second phase of the Shagohod has been completed. It's ready to run. The problem they were working on was that the prototype couldn't carry missiles large enough to launch, but Sokolov solved this issue by attaching a rocket engine to the tank. This allows the tank to move at over 300 miles per hour, and launching the missile at this speed allows it to travel up to 6,000 miles, easily reaching the United States. The prototype is in the base, but Volgin plans on mass producing them. He's also going to send them to Europe and Asia, forcing the world into nuclear war. Sokolov says that the only way to destroy the weapon is to use C3 explosives on the fuel tankers below. Sokolov then tells us that Tatiana is actually Volgin's lover, not Sokolov's wife. His wife has already been transported to the US. Volgin then arrives. He was looking for Rykov because the two are actually in a relationship, and he quickly realizes that this man isn't his lover. He unmasks Snake, and our main character finally gets the CQC jump on someone else. But as is the trend, the boss arrives to take Snake down. The boss then takes Volgin down as well, preventing him from killing Snake. Snake is then taken to a torture room. Sokolov is also here, but is killed by Volgin. Volgin is using his electricity to get information out of Snake, but the boss knows that it won't work because she taught him to resist this type of torture. Volgin assumes that Snake is going after the legacy, which he confirms is $100 billion that's hidden in different places. Volgin wants the boss to prove she wasn't working with him by taking out one of his eyes. Before she does this, Ocelot begins testing Tatiana by playing his Ocelot roulette game, but Snake stops him and his eye is shot out, certainly subverting the expectations of the fans that already knew Big Boss had lost one of his eyes. Ocelot then shoves a transmitter in Snake's wound, and the boss shoots Snake, giving him the gun and telling him to get out of here. She has once again shown an act of mercy on her former pupil. She clearly can't kill him, so what's her motive here? At this point, we don't really know. The only thing that we can assume is that she defected, but she still cares about Snake and doesn't want to have to take him out. She wants him to live. She doesn't want to destroy him. Eva then approaches Snake and tells him how to get out. Afterwards, we're transported into a jail cell and have to escape. We have to take our fake death pill that we've been equipped with since the beginning of the game, and by using our instant revival pill as soon as the guard opens the door. As we escape, though, we realize that we need equipment, as all of our stuff has been taken away. We need to meet with Ava to get our stuff back. As we head out of the facility, though, we are cornered by Ocelot and his unit. It's finally time for the cat to use his fated bullet that he's been saving for this very moment. Unfortunately for him, Snake jumps off the ledge and into the water below. We land in a river and we have another boss fight against the Sorrow, the last of the Cobra unit. While the battle with the End is incredibly impressive, the battle with the Sorrow is probably one of my favorites from a thematic and narrative perspective. The whole thing isn't even really a battle. We just slowly wade through the water, heading north the entire time. We have to evade the spirits of all the enemies that we've killed throughout our playthrough, including the Cobra unit. This is consistent with the previous games in the series. Even in Ghost Babel, bosses were telling us how many enemies we had killed. This was always an idea that Kojima had with the series, make the player feel guilty for the enemies they've killed, for not pursuing the stealth option. And ultimately, taking out enemies and killing them is something you might have to do in a tight situation, sure, but it is the easier path. What's much more difficult, the path less traveled, so to speak, is avoiding enemy contact wherever possible and getting out of the way. It's far easier to just take out enemies and kill them with a silenced pistol, especially because if we trank enemies, they can be woken up by other people that find them. They can effectively come back because they aren't dead, they're just out. So it becomes easier to take an enemy out for good, and this violence is met with guilt during the fight with the Sorrow.
I am the sorrow. Like you, I too am filled with sadness. This world is one of sadness. Battle brings death. Death brings sorrow.
At the end of the fight, we hear the Sorrow and the boss talking. During a call after this, we find out the Sorrow is actually dead. He's a spirit that haunts this place. The boss was forced to take him out 2 years ago. And with that, the Cobra unit has been wiped out, except for their leader, the boss. After this fight, we get to the waterfall and meet with Eva. She gives us our equipment back, finally, and she tries to get some of that snake, if you know what I mean, but Snake denies her. If we didn't remove the transmitter that Ocelot put inside of Snake during the torture sequence, then she will take it out here. But more importantly, she gives us the C3 explosives we need to destroy Groznygrad. Eva reveals that her goal here was to get the Shagohod plans for Khrushchev. Snake tries to warn her against Ocelot because he already suspects that she's a double agent. Eva also reveals why she loves riding a motorcycle, and this is classic Kojima, romanticizing what is seemingly a small part of a character.
If I didn't ride every day, I couldn't go on living. When I'm riding, the wind hits me so hard that it hurts. That pain keeps my mind off the pain of having to be someone else.
Snake gets into the base and we place the C3 on the fuel storage. We're quickly stopped because Volgin has captured Eva. The boss takes out Snake once again. Eva had found a piece of film that contains the location of the philosopher's legacy. This microfilm, because it contains the location, is effectively the legacy itself. Volgin decides to tell Snake about the legacy before killing him. During World War II, China, America, and the Soviet Union created a pact. They worked together to defeat the Axis by taking part in covert operations. They gathered the wealth to collectively fund these projects, and after the war, it was supposed to be split between the parties. Volgin's father took all of the money for the Soviet Union, laundering it through different avenues. The microfilm is actually a record of all of these transactions. Volgin now has the legacy and has used the money to create the Shagohod, and will use it to bring Mother Russia back to its former glory. At this point, Ocelot wants to battle Snake himself to get his own revenge, but Volgin refuses this. Ocelot then decides to help Snake by throwing him a weapon. We now have our boss fight against Volgin, who basically will just use Force Lightning Star Wars powers to attack us. He can even launch bullets with his lightning. We have to avoid these attacks and get behind Volgin to damage him. We can't attack him from the front. The fight itself is pretty easy. Ocelot betrays Volgin in the fight and refuses to help him, choosing the boss over the Russian. When we defeat Volgin, we get out of the base and Eva helps us escape. She met up with the boss and let her go. As Eva and Snake leave the base, the Shagohod chases them. It's still running, making it out of the base's destruction, and Volgin is piloting the thing. We have to fend off tons of troops as Eva navigates the motorcycle out of the rubble. We also have to keep the tank at a distance by firing volleys of RPGs at it. When we reach the bridge, Eva has luckily placed explosive charges on it, and we have to shoot them to crash the bridge. It doesn't work though because the Shagohod immediately makes it out. We then have another short fight against Volgin where we fire RPGs at the Shagohod tracks to stop his movement and then hit the tank's weak spot. And our final fight against the man is on the ground, where we have to hit Volgin atop the tank as he's controlling it with power line reins like some sort of Shagohod tank horse crossbreed. When he finally dies, he calls on his final power, but he's killed by a bolt of lightning.
Fried by a bolt of lightning. A fitting end.
And with that, Volgin has been taken down and the Shagohod has been destroyed. We couldn't quite extract Sokolov, but we still have one more objective to complete, and that's taking down the boss. Eva once again gets us out, as the boss is waiting for Snake at a nearby lake, but soldiers are chasing us. The two get away, but in a crash, and Eva impales herself on a stick. Snake isn't ready to let her go, though. We have to guide her through the forest, an escort mission of sorts. We have to actually manage her health and stamina the same way that we do Snake's. This sequence honestly isn't bad as far as most escort missions are concerned. It's pretty easy to engage with. Eva rarely gets in the way unless we make a mistake. Once we successfully get Eva through this sequence, we are met with the final part of the game. The boss has been waiting for Snake, their final showdown on a field of white flowers.
When life ends, it gives off a final lingering aroma. Light is but a farewell gift from the darkness to those on their way to die. I've been waiting, Snake, for a long time.
Obviously, an explanation is in order, and the boss is about to explain herself to Snake. She says that perspective changes all. It adjusts how people think, and with the times, enemies change. Russia and the US used to be allies, but now they're enemies. It all changes. Her goal is to reunite the philosophers. This is what she plans to do with Volgin's money.
And with the Colonel's money, I will achieve that end. Just as I once created the Cobras. They are my family. I may no longer be able to bear children, but I still have a family.
I will achieve that end, just as I once created the Cobras. They are my family. I may no longer be able to bear children, but I still have a family. In November of 1951, she was at a nuclear test site. This left her irradiated, and this is why she feels drawn to Snake, because they're both nuclear test subjects in some ways.
We're both slowly being eaten away by the karma of others. We'll never have the chance to die peacefully of old age. We have no tomorrow.
The boss was also the first person that the US sent into space because she was already irradiated, so the cosmic rays wouldn't be more than she'd already had. When she saw Earth, it gave her perspective. She realized that there were no borders or boundaries up there, no reason for people to be warring. It's all a big political battle. After all of this, she was sent to Cuba in 1961 to get exiles back to their countries. The government had changed plans, though, and at the last minute decided to bomb them. She had to watch as this happened. After this, she went underground, and 2 years later, she ended up facing the Sorrow. She had to take him down during a mission set up by the philosophers. At this point, the US, China, and the Soviet Union had formed the Wise Men's Committee. They made their pact, but the original members had died out in the 30s. The committee is now a shell of its former self. Their goal has been lost, and now they're involved in all wars and have no sense of good or evil. The cycle of war churns on. The boss's father was one of the philosophers, and she is the last remaining child of this organization. Her father was killed by the very organization he was a part of. Even the boss herself was wronged by them. She was pregnant with the Sorrow's child, and the kid was taken right after it was born on a battlefield. She has nothing left inside of her now. It's all been taken out. In 10 minutes, the place will be destroyed by bombers. These two must battle, and the winner will take on the title of boss.
And the one who inherits the title of boss will face an existence of endless battle.
This line is very similar to the line that Big Boss gives to Snake in Metal Gear 2. After this, we have our final boss battle of the game with the boss herself. There's a lot of meaning to this battle. The fact that mentor and pupil have finally come to blows, the fact that this battle is a prototype version of the one Big Boss would later have with his own genetic clone, and the fact that the boss battle is literally against someone called the Boss, a massive wink to the fact that yes, we are playing a video game. But the game isn't quite over yet, and there are still a ton of reveals that have yet to be made. The battle with the boss is pretty simple overall. She will hide behind trees on this white field and take shots at us from cover. Obviously, shooting her when she gets out of cover is the easiest way to damage her. She will also run at us and use CQC. We can defend against this by mashing the melee button, but it doesn't always work. If we get her on the ground, we can do some damage, but if she takes us down, she'll dismantle our weapon, throw away our ammo, and some other items in our inventory. We then have to pick that stuff back up, which is a huge pain. Getting rid of the player's items is another idea that's been around in the series for quite a while. This is a pretty big trend with Metal Gear overall. These small ideas popping up and then being fully realized in later entries. There's always room to improve for the series, always slowly getting a little bit better, a little different. When we do finally take the boss down, she gives Snake the microfilm, which contains the Philosopher's Legacy and the Patriot gun, to kill her. This isn't something that Snake wants to do, but something that he must, whether it's for the mission, whether it's for the boss, whether it's for his country, whether it's for himself, it doesn't really matter. This is his final test, his trial by fire, and he completes his mission. The field of flowers then turns red around him. The boss's horse arrives and Snake leaves on the MiG with Eva. The extraction plan is quickly thwarted as one of their engines is shot out and they are boarded by Ocelot. The two soldiers have a standoff. The two men exchange names here, Ocelot revealing his real name as Adamska, and Snake revealing his name as John. We have a choice where we must pick a weapon and decide whether to shoot Ocelot or not. One of them is loaded and one isn't. There's a few ways this scene can turn out, but it ultimately results in the same outcome. Ocelot jumps out of the plane and decides to let the pair leave. Soviet planes almost shoot the two out of the sky, but they're called off, most likely by Khrushchev, giving them a final piece of help for a job well done. Snake and Eva do escape the area and finally rest in a cabin. Since Snake is done with the mission, he allows himself a little alone time with Eva. When Snake wakes up, she's gone and she's left a tape for him to listen to. She draws some biblical parallels to her own name here, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve was tempted by the snake to take the forbidden fruit, but this time around it was a little different. Eva took the Philosopher's Legacy from Snake. She's been working for China this whole time. She was meant to steal the Philosopher's Legacy and bring it back to her country. The two NSA codebreakers who were supposed to be in this mission were actually men, but Adam never showed up, so she pretended to be Eva, taking the other one out. The whole goal of this mission was to bring China forward in weapons development. They have fallen behind in recent years and need to catch up. The money and plans for the Shagohod will allow them to develop nukes and have deterrence for the rest of the world. Eva was originally an agent of the Philosophers the entire time. She was taken as a child and raised to be a sleeper agent. The boss was the only one who caught on to her plan. The boss ended up telling Eva everything. Eva was supposed to kill anyone that knew about the legacy, but she spared Snake because of the boss's words. The tape explodes and Snake is meeting the president, but we hear the rest of the tape as narration. Eva tells Snake that the boss was really a hero. She knew everything that was going to happen, and she did it all as her duty, sacrificing herself for her country. The boss defected under direct orders from the government. It was all a big play staged to try and steal the legacy for America. The boss was meant to infiltrate Volgan's ranks and take the microfilm, but when Volgan launched the nuke, it threw a wrench into her plans. Since Khrushchev required that America prove it wasn't involved, this led to the boss having to be eliminated. This doesn't just mean that she had to take herself out. No. She had to be killed by the US. She had to be killed by her pupil, Snake.
Out of duty, she turned her back on her own comrades. A lesser woman would have been crushed by such a burden. The taint of disgrace will follow her to her grave. Future generations will revile her. In America as a despicable traitor with no sense of honor. And in Russia as a monster who unleashed a nuclear catastrophe. She will go down in official history as a war criminal. And no one will ever understand her. That was her final mission. And like a true soldier, she saw it through to the end.
The boss wanted Big Boss to know all of this. Naked Snake has officially also been given the title of Big Boss by the president. Big Boss then salutes the boss's grave, leaving the Patriot and flowers in her memory. She was a true hero, and even though her name was disgraced, few will carry on what she actually did for this country, and one of those men is Big Boss himself. After this, we see a time lapse of the next decade. Khrushchev was ousted, China got its nukes, SIGINT joined ARPA, Eva disappears, Paramedic established the first paramedic system in Seattle, Fox is disbanded by Zero, the US branch of the Philosophers changes their name to the Patriots, a group that we know all too well at this point. Big Boss establishes Foxhound, and finally in 1972, the Les Enfants Terribles project is created, and the sons of Big Boss are born, Liquid, Solidus, and Solid. After the credits, we hear Ocelot making a call once again. He's working with multiple people behind the scenes. He is planning to put someone in power to replace Khrushchev. He then calls the CIA, and it's clear that he was triple-crossing the Soviets the whole time. Eva actually got a fake version of the microfilm. The Philosopher's legacy is in the hands of the US. He even got the information on the system that Granin was working on, Metal Gear. And to top it all off, Ocelot was actually Adam this whole time. This ends Metal Gear Solid 3, but before we move on, we need to talk about a lot. First, I want to talk about the ending reveal with the boss. This character change makes the boss one of the most beloved, respected, and honorable characters in the Metal Gear series. Throughout the game, we sort of assume that the boss is being painted as a villain figure, but a reasonable villain. She must have motives that have led her to defect, and assumingly, we'll find those out by the end of the game. But she's in stark contrast to Volgin, who is basically the mustache-twirling evil guy of the game. He wants to destroy the world. He wants all-out nuclear war. He wants to take over. So in comparison, the boss pulling the strings behind him seems a lot more realistic. We assume this is a tale of pupil surpassing master, and it sort of is. When Snake finally meets the boss on the field of white flowers, her explanation plays into our assumptions. She was scorned by the US, she did everything for them, and with the addition of the change in perspective, she has realized that her patriotism didn't really matter in the end. This seems to make sense, but when we hear Eva's tapes, everything has changed. Our perspective has changed. The scene has changed. The boss is now a hero. She did all this on purpose. She gave her life for her country, for the mission. This plays into the entire theme of the game, that perspective and circumstance change the way we view things. This doesn't just apply to the boss, though. It applies to the player as well. We view almost every character differently throughout the course of the game. Even the Cobra unit themselves is viewed differently by the end. They were a creation of the boss. Their initial intention was much different than what they are now. This extends quite a bit to the rest of the series as well. This game completely changes the way that we view Big Boss as a character, and maybe we have a little bit more sympathy for him moving forward. It doesn't completely bridge the gap quite yet. It doesn't truly explain why Big Boss became the man we see in Metal Gear 1, but we'll get to that later. It does change how we view him, though, which is important. At this point, we now have 3 themes for the series. The first game was Gene, the second game was Meme, and the third game is Scene. And a point that I'd like to make here is about the themes of the series. They never truly leave once they are introduced. Themes persist quite a bit throughout each entry. The first game introduced the theme of genes and what is passed on through genetics, and destiny as a whole, but this never left the series. It was very present in Metal Gear Solid 2, and it's also present here. The fact that we are playing a character that will eventually create our protagonist, Solid Snake, is something that can't be lost on the player. Metal Gear Solid 2's themes of memes, or the things that we pass on to the next generation, also was not isolated to that entry. Even the end echoes this as he dies. He is happy that he is able to pass something on to the next generation. The boss is doing this for the future, the things moving forward. These themes are things that will not just go away, they will be there for the entire series. These themes are not just isolated to specific entries describing what one game is about, they are the lifeblood of Metal Gear and what makes the series what it is. Metal Gear Solid 3 does also do a lot in the way of symbolism. Of course, as you've probably realized now, the bosses of the Cobra unit represent the different emotions that Big Boss is going through in this mission. This could also be a reflection of Snake killing those emotions as he goes through this mission, pushing his ascent to the villain that we see later. This is also furthered by the fact that the boss's title was actually the Joy before she was the boss. Something I also haven't noted yet is that Ocelot is the boss's son, and this game basically confirms that. We're told pretty early on that Ocelot is the son of a legendary soldier and that he was born on a battlefield. The boss tells us that her baby was born on a battlefield, meaning that Ocelot is a child of the sorrow and the boss, effectively a child of the philosophers. But I think the biggest thing that sets Metal Gear Solid 3 apart from the other entries in the series is its slow burn, especially when directly compared to the previous entry, Metal Gear Solid 2. That game was very much about shocking the player and delivering its gut punch ending right at the finale. Most of the game is recontextualized right near the end of its runtime, but Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 are almost as directly opposite as two games in the same series could be. In Metal Gear Solid 2, we're playing Raiden, a clueless character who turns out to be a pawn of the system that he's in. He learns to find himself along the way and realizes what he wants for himself. In Metal Gear Solid 3, we're playing as Snake, who isn't exactly not a pawn, but he's mostly being used by the boss. She's manipulating the situation so that she can complete her mission, something that Snake would understand. It's not a bad manipulation, it's something that Snake and their country needed. And Metal Gear Solid 3's story is delivered much more consistently throughout its runtime. Sure, we have the 10 to 20 minute cutscenes that the Metal Gear franchise is known for, but it definitely isn't as common as it was in Metal Gear Solid 2. We have much longer stretches of gameplay than before, because that was more of a focus in this entry. I personally think that this is why this entry is most people's favorite in the series. I will say it definitely isn't my favorite, though I think it is a large contender for the best Metal Gear Solid game. It has just about everything you could want: a wacky story, a stoic and quiet main character, an emotional tale, gameplay that becomes almost sandbox-like in the amount of ways that you can approach it. The only thing it's really missing is Otacon. In all seriousness though, Metal Gear Solid 3 stands out against the rest of the series in terms of style as well. It's set in this jungle far before the other games, it looks different, it plays different, and it feels entirely different. The next entry in the series would really look nothing like this. But before we can talk about Metal Gear Solid 4, we need to talk about quite a few games before it. The team at Konami wanted to release a spin-off game right around the same time as Metal Gear Solid 3, so they did just that. Metal Gear Acid was designed to be a turn-based card battling game because Kojima had encouraged the team to take a different approach rather than just a Metal Gear game on a mobile system. The director for Metal Gear Acid was Shinta Nojiri, the same person who directed Metal Gear Ghost Babel. Kojima was once again involved as a producer, but not directing this entry for the series. Metal Gear Acid was released for PSP on December 16th, 2004. Now, I'm going to be upfront and honest here. I'm not going to talk about Acid or its sequel for that long, and that's honestly because I didn't enjoy them that much. I'm not saying that they are terrible games, they just definitely weren't it for me. I did talk about Ghost Babel in the previous video at length because I enjoyed that game, but I felt that Acid was just a bit too much in the other direction for me. Acid is a card battling game at its core. It's turn-based, so we have a certain number of actions on each turn to try and move around the map, attempting to get to our objective. These cards can be equipment that we equip, they can be weapons that we use automatically, or they can be cards that allow us to move around the battlefield. There are a variety of cards available to us. We obtain more cards by finding packs throughout the levels or buying the cards from the shop with the points that we gain from beating stages. We can then craft a deck specifically for the scenario that we're going into. A lot of mechanics and features carry over from the Metal Gear games. We can crawl on the ground, use vents to travel, we can't get seen by enemies or we'll go into an alert phase, we can knock on walls, etc. The game basically plays the same at its core. We need to get through levels and make our way to objectives without being seen by guards. We can use chaff grenades to get around cameras, we can take out enemies with suppressed weapons, we can start blasting guards when we inevitably get spotted, we can kick enemies to the ground. The only real difference is the abilities that we have at our disposal are randomized based on the cards that we draw. And there is a lot of strategy in determining what to do. You can skip your turn as you only have a certain number of actions, and waiting for enemies to move into the right positions before you advance can be crucial in winning or losing. Timing your actions, ensuring you have the right cards before moving ahead are both things that will make or break your run in a stage. But honestly, there are a lot of problems with this system. I want to preface my criticisms of this game with the fact that I'm not a huge fan of card builders. The whole genre can be really hit or miss for me. Sometimes I do really enjoy it, and other times I don't. I think if a card builder is well balanced, then the possibilities for builds can be endless. But if it isn't, then you're kind of required to find the right build, and that gets into the territory that I don't enjoy. Acid kind of feels like that for me. The first game in particular just feels really clunky. Oftentimes planning things out just really won't work in our favor, and this is mainly because of the direct contrast between Metal Gear Solid and Acid. In Metal Gear Solid, the world is in your hands. Whether you can maintain stealth and sneak around your enemies is entirely up to you. It's up to the skills that you've gained, the abilities that you've developed over time with any game in the series. It's also up to the knowledge that you've gathered about enemy movements, whether you know the map or you don't. All of this knowledge combined with your skill determines whether you can complete the level in total stealth or not. In Acid, it doesn't feel like we have this level of control. And that's fine in theory, that's the way that the card systems are designed. But in my opinion, it just doesn't really work here. Combine it with the fact that some of the levels can be terribly long, dragging on for quite some time, and you have yourself a mess. The story is alright, but really nothing to write home about. It's another spin-off that isn't really canon. It's set in an alternate sort of universe. A senator has been kidnapped on a hijacked plane, and the terrorists are requesting that the US government give them data on a project called Pythagoras, which obviously turns out to be a Metal Gear. The game involves some psychics, test subjects, and rituals. The story actually gets a lot more wacky than the mainline MGS games. It doesn't really retain any of the realism that those games have. Obviously, something like Metal Gear Solid isn't trying to be as realistic as possible. There are ghosts involved, but there's a baseline truth around the world that exists. Acid doesn't really feel like it has that, and it might be some of the reason that these entries are particularly interesting to some people, because it goes in that direction. And I will say that I do appreciate the team stepping out of the box with this entry. I think that trying new things in the series was probably a good idea for the time. Kojima himself encouraged this from the team. He wanted them to take a different approach. They didn't exactly just want Metal Gear Solid 3 for the PSP, and that's what the series has always been about at its core, switching things up and trying something new. Metal Gear Acid received pretty mixed reviews from critics. Some called its gameplay frustrating, while others enjoyed the unique perspective from the series. The game was obviously successful enough to warrant a sequel, and Shinta Nojiri was ready to return to direct it. I do like that Nojiri's work was recognized, and he was allowed to have his own directorial role on the Metal Gear spin-offs. The whole thing just seems to work for him. It also allows Kojima to focus on the mainline entries rather than the smaller titles. This encourages experimentation as well because the teams weren't always just following Kojima's word. Acid 2 is a bit different than the first game in this mini-series. Again, I won't talk about this entry too much because it isn't that relevant in the grand scheme of things, but I do think it's worth noting. Obviously, the largest difference in this entry is the wild cell shading and color that's going on here. I mean, this doesn't look like a Metal Gear game in the slightest. The gameplay is very similar to the first entry. It's mostly the same card battling system with a few adjustments. We now have a marketplace where we can sell cards, and getting new cards is a whole lot easier. We can actually upgrade cards this time around as well. The levels are a bit scaled down, so the pace has been picked up quite a bit. The game also just doesn't feel as clunky or punishing. The second game just flows a lot better overall. I still didn't love this game though, but it was a bit more tolerable for me. Unfortunately, as the second entry got better, the story suffered a little bit. This time around, Snake is forced into working for the FBI. He has to infiltrate an organization called Saint Logic and its executive, Thomas Copplethorne. The whole thing is similarly cartoonish like the first game, but it doesn't have any of the allure or esoteric interest that I found from Acid. The story is more simple, a bit more bland this time around. This could have been due to the fact that Nojiri himself wrote the game, supported by some of the writers from the previous game, like Tomokazu Fukushima. He wasn't involved with the writing on the first entry, and this being the big difference between the two games, leads me to believe that this is the cause of its lack of substance. The second entry was reviewed pretty well by critics. They certainly received it more favorably than the first entry, but the game doesn't seem to have done very well sales-wise, leading to the end of the series overall. But that wasn't the end of Metal Gear on the PSP. There was one more game that would test out some new mechanics for the series that would kickstart a lot of inspiration for future entries in Metal Gear. Around 2005, a subdivision within the Konami corporate structure was created. This was called Kojima Productions, and it was a merger between a bunch of different teams within Konami. It wasn't exactly a separate entity. Kojima didn't have his own independent development studio quite yet, but he did have his own team. Around this time, Ryan Payton became sort of the PR face of Kojima Productions, at least for a little bit. He was the one handling most of the interviews and the marketing, at least for the non-mainline entries in the Metal Gear franchise. At this point, production had also begun on the fourth entry in the Metal Gear Solid series, but another team within Kojima Productions was hard at work on another PSP title. This title was meant to be a genuine Metal Gear Solid game, and you can see in a lot of the interviews they didn't want fans to mistake this for another Acid-like game, an experimental offshoot, but a real legitimate Metal Gear game. It also was billed as fitting into the overall Metal Gear canon. It was meant to be canon, it was meant to be a part of the universe, even to the extent that Ryan Payton was claiming that you couldn't get the full effect of Metal Gear Solid 4 if you didn't play Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. And I don't want to spoil anything, but the events of MPO also have a direct relation with what occurs in Metal Gear Solid 4. In other words, in order to fully understand what happens in Metal Gear Solid 4, you'll need to have played Metal Gear Portable Ops. The general motto that the team had taken on in regards to this game was give the fans what they want. But that wasn't the whole truth, not while Kojima is involved. It isn't that Kojima doesn't give fans what they want, but he's more about giving the fans the things they never knew that they wanted. And Kojima was involved in Portable Ops. Like most other spin-off titles though, Kojima would not be writing the story, he would just be producing. The director was Masahiro Yamamoto, who had no prior experience with the Metal Gear Solid series. This was actually the first game that he directed at Konami. The game also had a ton of online features that obviously I can't really talk about because I can't use them now. I do know that you could battle people online and you could also scan Wi-Fi hotspots to download characters, which is kind of crazy for a game released in 2006. There was also an expansion released for the game called Portable Ops Plus, which removed the story campaign and was mainly focused on the multiplayer aspect. As for Portable Ops itself, it was released on December 5th, 2006 in North America, December 21st in Japan, May 15th, 2007 in Australia, and May 25th, 2007 in the EU, all for the Sony PlayStation Portable. Now, I'm sure you're asking at this point, is Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops canon? And that's kind of a tricky question. The game actually is a direct sequel to Metal Gear Solid 3. It takes place 6 years after that game and follows Big Boss after he left the Fox unit. If you want to be technical and go by Kojima's word, then he seems to often imply that anything that was not directed by him is not a canon game. The official timeline released by Konami does not recognize Portable Ops, and even the most recent game in the series, Metal Gear Solid 5, does not recognize the game. Sure, it could fit in somewhere if you ignore a few things that don't really match up with the other games, but it's in this kind of in-between space, because unlike the other games, it isn't overtly set in an alternate timeline. It was originally meant to be a canon game, and then later games sort of went against that intention. In the end, it sort of becomes up to you and your own headcanon. As far as I can tell, the game isn't officially recognized as canon, and I take it as a sort of fun little fan fiction to fill in the gaps. The game begins as Big Boss is waking up in captivity. It's revealed that Snake quit the Fox unit right after the events of Metal Gear Solid 3. The man that's kidnapped him is from Fox, and he's looking for the Philosopher's legacy. Snake is told that the CIA only got half of the legacy. Snake is quickly introduced to a fellow prisoner, another American, who turns out to be Roy Campbell. He was here with the Fox unit investigating this Soviet base, but they were ambushed. Snake is led out of the base by Campbell to try and get contact with the outside. He gets back into contact with Paramedic, but Major Zero was arrested by the US military. A CIA unit stole a top-secret weapon from the US, and they think Zero was behind it. Snake has also been charged in this revolt, but it turns out it was Snake's old unit. Sigint is back in this entry as well. He tells us specifically that our goal is to clear Snake's name. We have to find out who was behind all of this. On top of that, the people we are up against, the Fox unit, are creating a military nation, so it looks like we're going to need some friends. Snake decides to enlist the help of Campbell, and with that, we've begun creating a group of mercenaries of our own. Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops mostly plays like other Metal Gear games. We crawl around facilities, use stealth to take out enemies, and make our way to objectives. We can aim down our sights, crawl through vents, etc., etc. But what really sets Portable Ops apart from the mainline entries in the series is the Comrade system. Portable Ops isn't laid out like Snake Eater or even Sons of Liberty. We don't have connected areas in a large line that we traverse, eventually reaching the end to a linear path. Instead, there are small stages all around this area of South America that we're in, San Jeronimo. We will travel to these stages naturally throughout the story, but we can also return to them whenever we'd like. These stages are usually pretty contained, either small military bases or slices of a little town. Guards will patrol these areas and we can take them out and sift through the places to try and find items or weapons. But the biggest thing that we can do is incapacitate soldiers and bring them back to our truck. After the mission, the soldiers that we've kidnapped will be turned to our side back at base. It takes some time for us to convert them, but once we do, we can use them in our operation. This can be done in multiple ways. We can directly take them into a mission. We can swap out and play different characters during missions, and you might be thinking, why the hell would we play an unnamed soldier when we could just play the soldier, Big Boss himself? Well, Big Boss is certainly good at a lot of things. Stealth, taking out enemies from afar, creeping and sneaking, but he isn't necessarily as good at things like dragging enemies back to the truck. Because of this, other soldiers can be useful. Certain soldiers are very good at using shotguns, some are better at throwing. There are a variety of different soldiers available to us, so having a varied team is incredibly useful. But all of the soldiers that we collect have another use outside of battle. We can also assign them to different teams within the menu to allow them to automatically carry out specific tasks. Soldiers assigned to the spy team will research specific areas of the map and deliver us intel about those places. This is used to find parts of the main story, but also to make us aware of certain weapons, ammunition, or equipment that's available. We can also set them to the tech department so that they can work on developing new equipment and weapons for us to outfit our soldiers with. We can set them to the medical department, which will increase the amount of health and stamina that is regained by both Snake and the soldiers available. All of our units and Snake's stealth and stamina meters are static. They will not regenerate within combat. We can pass time up to 3 phases while in the menu, which will restore these meters, but they will go up further if we have people equipped in the medical division. This is important because some soldiers, when they reach no health in battle, will be permanently killed. We will then have to replace them by heading back out into the battlefield and recruiting. All of these systems are incredibly important and will be integral to whether we succeed on the battlefield or not. They really make up the core of what this game is trying to do, and honestly, it's the best part about Portable Ops. If you're already familiar with the Metal Gear series, then a lot of these mechanics will be no stranger to you. They will reappear in later entries in the series and will become very important. But this was the first implementation of those mechanics, the prototype for this sort of thing, and it works really well. This sort of staff management fits in great for the Metal Gear series. While this game definitely plays like Metal Gear Solid, it represents a new shift for the series. Adding this management aspect slaps another layer on top of what was already presented. I will say the big downside for me with Portable Ops is just how dated it is. The other games in the series don't really feel like they were held back very much, but because of the limitations of the PSP at the time, Portable Ops couldn't ever really be a one-to-one Metal Gear Solid game. Some of the gameplay is a little clunky, and having the limitation of one joystick really holds the game back from being absolutely perfect. Obviously, another game in the series would do what it was trying to do much better, but we'll get to that down the line. The rest of Portable Ops deals with tracking down and trying to pin Gene for the crimes that Snake and Zero are being charged with. Snake eventually goes up against the Fox unit, takes down Gene, and destroys Metal Gear Roxa. He is then given all of the equipment and people in Army's Heaven, the group that Gene was trying to build. Snake then establishes Foxhound, while we learn that Ocelot is trying to find out who the Philosophers are. At the end of the game, Ocelot joins an unknown group to try and get the Philosophers' names, but only under the condition that Big Boss is involved. Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops overall is a game that's really impressive for its time. It's probably one of the better spin-off games in the Metal Gear series. In my mind, it does what one of these spin-offs can do best. It gives fans a worthy successor to the Metal Gear series in the same form that they know and love, while also trying new things and stepping out of the box. The game's story is a little bit out of place for me, feeling kind of like a weird what-if scenario. It doesn't feel like it fits into the Metal Gear canon super well, which is why I didn't talk about it for super long, and the game has its issues with controls and mechanics, but overall it is a pretty enjoyable experience, one that I think is certainly worthy of a remaster to bring it up to date. Metal Gear Solid 3 is one of the best Metal Gear games, and that's kind of an odd thing to say, because it doesn't really mean much. In a series that is so full of fantastic entries, saying that one stands above the rest, where most of them are equal, only really means that it's slightly greater than some of the greatest video games. But Snake Eater really just manages to set itself apart. Now, while I do think that it is technically better than most of the games in the series, it isn't my favorite. In a list of my favorites, it probably falls somewhere towards the bottom, to be honest. This is mostly because the game just doesn't have a lot of what makes these games really special for me. The story doesn't feel as truly groundbreaking as something like Metal Gear Solid. It doesn't feel like it has the depth of commentary as something like Metal Gear Solid 2, but Metal Gear Solid 3 excels in gameplay above all the rest. The game feels about as good as it could possibly get within this era of consoles. The controls are incredibly smooth, aiming and shooting feel natural, the jungle as a setting is very deep, and the responsibility of control is on the player. Something that's very important in stealth games is the ability to have control. The consequences of getting spotted are high, and if we do get spotted, we should feel like it's because of a mistake we made, not a cheap mechanic or a difficult to deal with system. Metal Gear Solid 3 makes us feel like we are entirely in control. We even control our hunger and our wound treatment. Everything is given to the player, and it's up to us to make it out alive. The boss battles in Metal Gear Solid 3 are also some of the best the series has ever seen. Fights like the Sorrow and the End stand the test of time. They are fights that I will never be able to forget about. They have stuck in the minds of gamers everywhere. They have had their own legacy, creating a cast of interesting villains that reflect even the protagonist himself. And the story of Metal Gear Solid 3 doesn't fail on any front. At the time it was released, it was a peek into the origins of one of the biggest villains of the series, and the one who started this all. It introduced characters that would never be forgotten, like the boss and Zero, and it absolutely stands the test of time. It's a game that feels like it hasn't even aged a day. It's definitely not my favorite in the series, but it really doesn't do much wrong. At this time, Metal Gear Solid 4 was already being developed, and while Kojima didn't originally intend on directing that title, just like Metal Gear Solid 3, he would inevitably be pulled back into the series that he created. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.